If you're someone who cries easily, there's a good chance you've been completely misunderstanding yourself. What you've always looked at as a weakness might actually be one of the most incredible capabilities of the human brain. Today, psychologists call people like us highly sensitive people, or HSPs. And what science has uncovered over the last few decades might completely change how you view your own emotions. In a world that constantly glorifies hustle, grit, and thick skin, those who feel deeply are often the most misunderstood. Growing up, we're all too familiar with phrases like, "Don't be so sensitive," "It's not that big of a deal," or "Just toughen up." Over time, many of us start to believe that our emotional nature is a defect. We try to suppress our feelings, put up a tough exterior, and force ourselves to blend in with everyone else. But the strange thing is, the harder we try to change, the more exhausted we get. Because deep down, we are fighting the very way our brains were wired. There are people who can watch a sad movie and move on with their day a few minutes later. But then, there are those who carry that story with them for hours. Some people can walk into a crowded room and feel completely fine. Others can walk in and instantly read the room, sensing a shift in the vibe even if nobody says a word. Some can brush off a casual comment instantly, while others will remember the exact emotional undertone behind those words for days. If you fall into that second group, you aren't weak. You're just experiencing life in high definition. Back in the 1990s, psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron began researching this exact phenomenon. She noticed a specific group of people who shared striking similarities. They processed information more deeply before acting. They were highly attuned to their environment. They possessed an immense capacity for empathy. And they easily hit a wall of sensory overload when faced with too much noise, bright lights, or social stimulation. After years of research, she termed this trait sensory processing sensitivity. The most crucial takeaway here? This is not a diagnosis. It is not a mental disorder. It is not something that needs to be fixed. It is simply a different operating system for the nervous system. Think of it like two different cameras capturing the exact same scene. One shoots in standard definition, the other shoots in ultra-high definition 4K. Both are looking at the exact same world, but the second one captures significantly more detail. It catches the subtle shifts that the first one misses entirely. That is what it's like to navigate the world as an HSP. You don't live in a different reality. You just notice more of the reality everyone else is in. You pick up on micro-expressions. You hear the exhaustion hidden beneath a standard, "I'm fine" text. You feel the tension in a group before anyone else even registers it. But here's the catch. When you absorb more data, your brain has to work twice as hard to process it. This is where what I call the emotional magnifying glass comes into play. Imagine an emotion is just a single drop of water. For most people, it stays just that, a tiny drop. But for an HSP, the brain acts like a magnifying glass. It doesn't just see the drop. It zooms in on every single element inside it. A passing comment can trigger a domino effect of thoughts about its deeper meaning, intent, and impact on the relationship. A heartbreaking scene in a movie can instantly tap into your own past heartbreaks. This doesn't happen because HSPs want to overthink. It happens almost automatically. Brain imaging studies show that highly sensitive individuals exhibit significantly higher activity in brain regions associated with empathy, social awareness, and deep information processing. In other words, you don't just observe other people's feelings, you practically absorb them. That's why you might find yourself tearing up when you see someone else hurting, even if their story has nothing to do with you. Your brain is mirroring their emotional pain on a much higher volume than average. This is why so many HSPs feel like emotional sponges. You walk into a room full of joy, and that positive energy lifts you right up. But walk into a toxic, stressful environment, and you'll find yourself completely drained without knowing why. It's not a lack of strength. It's just that your nervous system is picking up way more signals. And just like any computer, the more data running in the background, the more battery power it drains. Because of this, sensitive people are often mislabeled as overthinkers. In reality, they aren't just overthinking. They are deeply processing. When faced with a decision, an HSP's brain automatically maps out multiple scenarios. They cross-reference past experiences, predict potential future outcomes, and try to connect all the dots. So, while someone else might make a split-second decision, an HSP usually needs time to sit with it. This can look like indecisiveness from the outside. But in reality, this deep processing is exactly what allows them to spot risks and loopholes that everyone else completely blows past. Imagine a corporate meeting. Everyone is hyped about a flashy new project and wants to greenlight it immediately. But there's one person sitting quietly. It's not because they lack confidence or don't get the concept. It's because they're noticing the fine print. They foresee a gap in execution, a hidden bottleneck, or how this change might burn out the team. Time and again, sensitive people are the ones who detect a crisis before it even happens. This isn't because they're smarter. It's because they process information thoroughly. But if this trait is such a superpower, why does it feel so exhausting to live with? The answer lies in the flip side of the coin. When you are constantly bombarded with more stimuli than the average person, you hit sensory overload much faster. A chaotic office, a back-to-back schedule, or a toxic news cycle can completely fry an HSP's nervous system. Like a laptop running too many heavy apps at once, their brain needs downtime to cool down and reset. And that brings us right back to our original question. Why do sensitive people cry so easily? In many cultures, tears are written off as weakness. But from a psychological standpoint, crying is one of the most efficient self-regulating mechanisms the body has. After a good cry, most people report feeling a sense of release, calm, and emotional reset. While scientists are still studying the exact chemistry, evidence suggests that emotional tears actually help flush out stress hormones. You've probably been there before. You spend days trying to hold it together. You push through work, force a smile, and keep grinding. But eventually, the emotional cup overflows. You break down and cry. And strangely enough, once the tears stop, you feel lighter. The problem hasn't magically disappeared, but your body has successfully discharged the heavy emotional weight it was carrying for days, or even weeks. For HSPs, because emotions are dialed up to 10, the need for that emotional release simply comes around more often. What's truly fascinating is that this sensitivity isn't an evolutionary glitch. If it were purely a disadvantage, natural selection would have weeded it out a long time ago. Instead, researchers have found this exact trait in over 100 different animal species. It's not random. It's a survival strategy that has existed for millions of years. Picture an ancient tribe out in the wild. A tribe absolutely needs fierce warriors who can react instantly to a threat. But if everyone is a reactionary warrior, the tribe is doomed. They also need observers. They need the individuals who notice the subtle shift in the wind before a storm hits, or who sense danger when it's still miles away. In other words, the tribe needs both warriors and watchers. Highly sensitive people historically served as the community's early warning radar system. Today, we aren't dodging predators or tracking storms, but that radar role hasn't changed. HSPs are usually the first to notice when a family member, friend, or coworker is struggling. They are the ones who create art, music, and stories that touch people's souls. They listen more than they speak. They observe rather than judge. In a world that is becoming increasingly fast and loud, this deep empathy is one of our rarest and most valuable assets. To explain this variation, modern psychology uses a beautiful framework called the Orchid and the Dandelion theory. Some people are like dandelions. They can grow and thrive just about anywhere, regardless of the soil or weather. They are naturally resilient to harsh environments. On the other hand, some people are like orchids. They are incredibly sensitive to their environment. If placed in the wrong soil or neglected, they wither easily. But if you give an orchid the right environment, care, and conditions, it grows into something spectacular that far outshines the rest. Recent studies call this Vantage sensitivity. It means that while sensitive people are more vulnerable to negative environments, they also benefit disproportionately more from positive ones. A loving environment boosts their growth exponentially. A great mentor can change their entire trajectory. A healthy relationship allows them to thrive on a level that's far above average. Sensitivity doesn't just make you fragile. It gives you an incredibly high ceiling for growth when you're in the right space. This is the ultimate lesson that takes most HSPs a lifetime to learn. The problem isn't who you are. The problem is where you are trying to force yourself to fit. An orchid cannot bloom in the desert, but that doesn't mean it's a broken flower. It just means it needs its proper environment. So many people spend their entire youth trying to desensitize themselves. They try to grow thicker skin, numb out, and act tough. But eventually, they realize that changing their life isn't about getting rid of their sensitivity. It's about learning how to manage it. Instead of fighting your design, you have to protect your energy. You need quiet pockets of time to recover after a high stimulus day. You need to set firm, healthy boundaries in your relationships. You need to actively choose environments that nurture your peace, rather than forcing yourself to survive in chaos. And most importantly, you need to stop viewing your sensitivity as a flaw. The world doesn't just need people who are strong in the traditional sense. We desperately need people who can empathize, who know how to listen, and who notice the things everyone else is too busy to see. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in art, education, psychology, and even leadership come from people who chose to keep their hearts open and feel deeply, rather than locking them away. So, if you're someone who cries easily, it's time to rewrite your narrative. Those tears aren't proof of weakness. They are proof that you are experiencing this life with a depth that not everyone gets to touch. You don't need to fix yourself. You just need to understand yourself. Because sometimes, the very thing we spend our whole lives trying to fix is actually the most beautiful gift we have to offer. If you saw yourself in this story, drop the word orchid in the comments below. And remember, crying easily doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes, it's just the sign of a soul that feels this world on a whole different level.